Well, hi there, and welcome to the show. I am joined by Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos, as I am each Tuesday. Eric, how are you?
I'm ready to get flocked. How about you, Brian?
I was going to say, I don't even know why I bother asking you. I should just ask the flock people if they could tell me, how is Eric Peters doing today? I'm sure they're watching and
It's
taking
probably
notes.
it is probably going to get to that. The other day I caught an interview with that little creep that is the co-founder of the company talking about how we need to compromise. That's just lovely. Where have we heard this before? Oh, put on a mask. It's a
Right?
small ask. We're all in this together. If you've got nothing to hide, what are you worried about?
And that is the gist of why, when people say, well, what's the problem here? This helps the police and it's such a great thing for our safety. And you've got to remember, think of how you were treated during COVID and then put unending, daily, ongoing surveillance that's scooping up every bit of information about you, not just your license plate, but recreating your entire whereabouts, everywhere you go, the people you associate with, and tell me that COVID would have been even better, with that in place.
One of the most troubling things about this to me is the indecency of it. The way they're trying to frame the natural instinct that I think any person has to not be watched constantly as somehow endorsing criminality, that you're a bad person because you don't want to be watched all the time. That infuriates me. This idea that nobody's to be trusted, everybody's potentially up to something, so everybody's got to be watched all the time. It's kind of like they're trying to create this sort of kindergarten for adults, a kindergarten full of problem children, who have to be kept on a tight leash, watched all the time because they might be up to something. I mean, imagine if you were stuck in a marriage with somebody who thought you were up to something all the time, constantly wanting to look over your shoulder, see what you're doing, and you
Check
knew
your
not doing
phone.
anything. I'm not. What the heck? What is this sort of the way they're trying to foster a state of paranoia and fear in people? That's what this really comes down to. And the way that this is going to be used against us to enforce all these petty laws, something people don't seem to get. Some people, they just sort of like skip over this because in their minds they think, oh, it's only the bad sheep that are going to be gotten. The people who are genuinely bad people who are doing awful things. They don't recognize this. There's a lot of pedantic, penny ante little laws out there that we all transgress all the time. I don't wear my seatbelt because it's nobody's business. I don't like them, right? But I'm not hurting you. I'm not hurting anybody by not wearing a seatbelt, and various things of that nature. So you want to have a system erected in which literally every little thing that you do that potentially is actionable, because it's illegal, it's an offense, they know about it and they can immediately go after you for it, whether electronically or actually sending a cop to your door over something. You want to live in a world like that? I know it's been 40 years since the since the Soviet Union fell apart, and I think that's part of the reason why there are a lot of people out there who don't see the harm in this because they can't remember, what it was like once. That there was this wall that existed between the East and the West, and the people who lived on the other side of the wall were desperate to get out of there because they were stuck in the kind of society that they're trying to recreate right here, right now.
I think it's telling too that Flock has incorporated safety as a part of its name. Flock safety, and oh, who could be against that? And yet, it's so Orwellian because their definition of safety would probably have coincided well with what the Stasi were doing to people in East Germany. We're just keeping them safe. Oh, you're
Sure,
listening
in
in on their
German, it's called
conversations. You're
Sicherheit.
tracking them day and night for
Yeah,
safety.
in Germany, the term is Sicherheit, security, safety, and they had the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, which was concerned with internal security. They had the same thing in Russia, the NKVD. I can't pronounce the Russian, but it was basically, the Committee for Internal Security, something like that. And then, to me, the most insulting aspect of it is that they chose that word flock, like a flock of sheep, herd animals. They're
Absolutely.
literally conveying their contempt for us, the way they look at us. We're animals to be penned and herded, so that they can, do what they will with us. And I wrote an article the other day trying to sort of psychoanalyze this Garrett Langley guy. And I've been riding this hobby horse for some time. Langley is 38. He looks 12, but he's 38. I'm not going to ad hominem him, but the thing I got at in my article was that he was somebody who, like all people his age, most people his age, grew up in this safety culture, grew up strapped into a safety seat, grew up taught implicitly to regard cars as dangerous things, driving as an inherently risky and unsafe thing. Probably went to trunk or treat, at a school gym somewhere because you can't have kids on their own going trick or treating. There might be a bad stranger out there, and I'm not minimizing the fact that, of course, there are some bad people out there. But what I'm trying to get at here is this inculcation of constant perpetual fear about everything. And the corollary of that, well, if we have to fear everything, then we need to be kept safe. So we'll look to the state. And now it's not even the state, it's these private companies. The danger of this is incandescent, the way they're offloading tyranny to the so-called private sector. It's no longer the government that's trying to oppress us, it's private corporations for money, for profit. Garrett
Yes.
Langley is going to become a really rich dude, off of taking away whatever tattered shreds of privacy we still have left.
I'm going to be sending you a link, and I'm including this in today's show notes of an article that was published in Wired just recently. This was August 19th. Flock has a powerful new AI tool for police, and we got its code. And what they did was the Wired staff went in and they actually found the code in a type of software called Night Shift that is used by Flock, and it connects it with police case files, 911 dispatch logs, or commercial identity records. And, Flock keeps telling us, well, we don't track people, or we don't try to look for their identity. It's just reading license plates. Baloney. This
Yeah.
shows that network of cameras can pick out potential witnesses just by setting in a prompt into the system saying, give me the cars that passed through this area during this time period, and then they'll go through those cars and who would be a likely witness to something that happened here. It's surveillance, 24/7 surveillance, just waiting for someone to access it and reconstruct your life, my life, or whoever they may want to take an interest in the future.
Yeah, I point out to my conservative friends, who seem to think that this is okay because, after all, we got to go after the bad guys, law and order, that sort of conservative. I asked them, well, imagine, go back in time a few years to the January 6th thing, after the 2020 election. And imagine if this technology existed. And instead of identifying the relative handful of people that they did, they knew every last person who went up there. And again, I'm not condoning violence. I'm not saying that I'm pointing out that you express yourself. You just simply show up somewhere holding a sign. I don't like whatever the policy is. They know who you are. They know that you've been there. You want to live in a world like that, where you dare not express a single contrarian thought. You dare not attend a rally, a peaceful rally, a constitutionally protected rally, because the state's going to know. And implicit in the state knowing is the state can punish you for that, and will. You want to live like that? Nobody wants to live like that who isn't out of their
Not a
mind
chance.
or who has the mind of an imbecile.
I want to share with you just a quick excerpt from this article that just kind of describes the inversion that takes place here. Flock Safety built its business on this simple idea of, well, the camera photographs a passing car, converts the plate to text, and then checks it against a list of vehicles police are looking for. Sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they don't. Cars that aren't on the list are supposed to be recorded, but otherwise ignored. Well, this software that Wired gained access to had preloaded prompts that describe an inversion of this arrangement, where an officer doesn't need a plate, a name, or even a crime to start. They just simply type in a location, a stretch of time, a pattern of behavior, and the system is designed to find and head back to them everybody who fits into that.
Isn't that great?
That's that's scary.
Well, and given, to get back to what I was talking about earlier, given the fact that literally every one of us, if we go outside of our home, probably commits an infraction of some kind every single day. Okay. Given that fact, and given the sophistication of this technology, they will know about that. They will know every time you do something that is contrary to the law, whatever that may be. It doesn't matter that you're, not a criminal, but oh my gosh, you made an illegal U-turn. You didn't come to a full stop at that stop sign. All these things. Just rack your brain and think about all the little things that you do every day that are technically illegal, but you do them anyway because so what? It's not hurting anybody. I don't feel any moral guilt because I know that I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's just a stupid law. At least we had the the kind of sad luxury of being able to get away with these small transgressions most of the time. We can drive a little faster than whatever the speed limit is. We don't have to buckle up because, unless we actually get pulled over, we'll probably be okay. But I literally would head into Z Hills and live in the woods before I would live in a society where I know that I have to obey whatever these clowns say, no matter how insufferable, petty, tyrannical, out of control it is. Because if I don't, they're going to get me. They're going to know immediately, and they'll debit my bank account. They'll demonetize me. Maybe they'll send the cops to my house to arrest me over nothing. That's East Germany. That's where we're headed. East Germany in America.
Yep. And all in the name of safety. The better to keep
Now,
you safe with, my dear, says Red
I
Riding
hope
Hood's
that my
grandmother.
hope is that that will eventually become something like a curse word, or at least a delegitimized word, much in the way that the overuse of the term racist has really
Hmm.
lost a lot of its power, because it was used to impugn the motives of decent people who have nothing against other people because they're black or Chinese or whatever they happen to be, but they just have questions about certain policies. And it gets tiresome to be basically told you're some kind of a moral cretin because you raise questions about things. And it's the same with this safety stuff. It has gotten so out of hand. It used to be that this would have been considered a pathology, 30 or 40 years ago. This it's a neurosis. This constant obsessing about safety. It is disproportionate. It is mentally unstable, and everybody recognizes it. We feel it. Like, this is not reasonable. It's reasonable to weigh costs and benefits, risks and reward. It is not reasonable to just live your life constantly in safety, safety, safety. Mike Rowe talks about this. Safety is not
Hmm.
job one. Getting the job done is job one. And you do your best to reasonably minimize risks within that context. But if all you're focused on is safety, it's kind of a death. It is theoretically unsafe to get out of bed. You might trip and fall, right? It's possible. So, you would laugh at a person who wouldn't get out of bed because they were worried about tripping and falling. But we've gotten to that point in this country, and it's got to stop.
There's I believe, state legislator in New Hampshire who summarized beautifully what these flock cameras do. And I'm gonna paraphrase what he says here, but he says flock isn't a tool that rescues kids. He says it's a warrantless, always on surveillance grid that tracks every vehicle, every trip, every day, building a permanent movement database on the innocent majority so the state can occasionally catch the guilty minority. And he says
Yeah.
privacy is not the opposite of security. Unchecked government power is the threat. And just trust us has never been an American principle, and it doesn't become one just because some officers misuse the system less often than others. In that Wired article, one of the things it pointed out was when the capabilities of that AI software combined with Flock are given to investigators, police investigators, they described it as addictive. In other words, it was so
Sure.
thorough and it could create things. It could create a dossier on people, again, suspected of no crime, but just simply through patterns. And the investigators are like, oh my gosh, I got to have more. It's like
It, it,
crack to them.
there's a creepy voyeuristic aspect to this, and that's well said. It used to be that if somebody was kind of like looking in your window, you'd call the cops, right? Now the cops are looking through your window. Basically, this idea of watching people is inherently creepy. What psychologically well balanced person wants to watch other people all the time? A creepy person, a person who doesn't
Right.
understand boundaries. It's not about they might be doing something. It's creepy.
Yeah, this state legislator, his name is David J. Place, and he represents District 47 in Rhode Island. Actually, he says the same network that finds a stolen car with a child in it can just as easily be used for political tracking, domestic dispute, or just old-fashioned government surveillance without warrants or due process. And he says, look, round up the actual bad guys with probable cause and warrants, but don't build a panopticon and call it balance, which
Yeah,
is what
and
Eric Erickson, was trying to make the case. Well, we just need more balance in society between privacy and security.
nonsense. And another aspect of this, it's not just Flock, it's also the Ring doorbell cameras, the Axon cameras, and this is in my bailiwick. the vehicle manufacturers are looking into embedding cameras in the cars, essentially mobile flock cameras. So the car you drive is spying on the other cars as you drive. This is literally the panopticon. People hear that word a lot, but it's actually literally being created. And in part, it's being sold to people on the basis of safety. Oh, you got to have a Ring doorbell camera because the porch pirates are going to come and take your package otherwise. And they don't understand that
Right.
they're basically like the data that's being culled. It's not discrete. It's not like in the past you own a business and you have your closed circuit camera to deal with shoplifters and pilferage and things like that. This is connected to the hive mind. So you're having this camera thing put in your door, the Ring camera, and you're helping them collect data on your neighbors and everything else that goes on. And your neighbors in turn are doing the same to you. East Germany again.
So consider this: cameras on every corner, masked federal agents. Now we have the new pain compliance shock gloves that are, going to apparently become standard
Oh
issue.
my God.
Your own car watching you, as you just pointed out. Tell me again how that all jives with what a free country looks like, because that sounds like the exact opposite to me.
It looks like an 80s Sly Stone, Sylvester Stallone movie, kind of like Judge Dredd, you know,
Yep.
or Demolition Man, something like that. We laughed back in the 80s because it was kind of campy and kind of, surreal. And it was like, oh, that'll never happen in America. Well, here we are. You hear a lot about predictive programming. Maybe they were predictively programming us, getting us ready for what would inevitably become. Technology is a tool, but technology is being abused and it's got to be gotten under control. I don't know exactly what the answer is other than, perhaps a wholesale rejection of it. I understand that there are aspects of it that can be useful, but this is profoundly dangerous in my view. This is stuff that I think on principle, maybe we just have to go back to analog, like Battlestar Galactica. Remember that? And just be done with this, because if we don't, it is going to completely end us as a species. It's going to turn us into ants.
Well, I'm not going to endorse, hey, people, you should go out there and cut down these flock cameras. Um, I would say this: if I ever were called to be on the jury of someone who cut down a flock camera, I definitely would not be voting to convict. And
100%.
maybe jury nullification is one way to approach this. I noticed in my old stomping grounds in southern Utah, a couple of teenagers were just arrested for taking down a flock camera and destroying it. And again, I'm not saying it's good to destroy private property, but I also saw immediately people, and I'm talking upstanding members of the community, saying, call the jail and put money on the commissary for these young men. Don't leave them out hanging to dry. Just let's support them as best we can for taking a stand that not everybody dares to take.
Yeah, I think more fundamentally, and I talk about this a lot, people need to recover the ability to make a distinction between that which is morally wrong and that which is legally not permitted. Unfortunately, people have been conditioned in this country to regard the two things as synonymous. In other words, if something is illegal, then it must be immoral. That's simply not true. And it's very easy to demonstrate this. Slavery was once legal. It was legal to literally own
Sure.
another person. And if you help the slave to get away from the person who claimed to own that man, well, then you are a
Yep.
criminal. I mean,
Yep.
it's a very simple thing. So you should ask yourself that about every law. I'm not recommending people do awful things. I'm saying look at whether a law is awful, and don't feel any shame or guilt about kind of looking askance at a law that clearly, well, I don't see how this hurts anybody if I do this. If I don't come to a complete stop at that stop sign up at the top of the hill from my house where I can see for a quarter mile in either way, how am I hurting anybody? Why should I be punished for not completely coming to a stop? Because I'm just a mindless rule follower. That's what I'm supposed to be, just because the sign is there. So I'm a stupid sheep, a herd animal who can't think for myself. No, Americans used to be kind of known for their ability to think for themselves. We need to recover that.
Yep. Free individuals will choose what's right because they freely, they govern themselves and they know the difference between right and wrong. They're more concerned with that than they are with legal and illegal. And by virtue of that, that doesn't mean that they're out there, you know, driving drunk through a school zone and steering with their feet. It just means that they can discern that. We've had this conversation about traffic signals. If I'm sitting at a traffic signal and it's, especially like the wee hours of the morning and it's not changing, Am I duty bound to sit there until that traffic signal gives me permission? Not only no, but hell no. I
Right.
will wait as long as I believe is reasonable. And if I can look and see there's nobody coming and I've come to a complete stop, look, I've satisfied my duty. I'm going to move on. And for some
Sure. And
people,
what kind
that's,
of a
wow,
person
you're a
would think that you,
criminal?
yeah, what kind of person thinks that you should be punished for doing that? A thoughtless person, in my opinion, a person who doesn't understand moral concepts.
Oh, I
Another
think
thing
we
that
all
I'd
know
like to
people who
see,
would call the cops based on that. I
yeah,
saw a car run a red light.
some
Oh,
would.
oh
And this gets to
wow.
my next point. I think that in order to recover ourselves as a people, as a society, we need to get back to regarding busybodies as disreputable. When we were kids, you and I, busybodies were regarded as contemptible people, as small-minded, petty little tyrants who enjoyed sadistically, finding something that they could leverage against somebody else. Ooh, they're pulling the curtains back like Mrs. Kravitz from Bewitched. Look, look, awful. These are the most awful kinds of people, and everybody understands this. It's interesting to me that in your own life, you would never want to be friends with a busybody. You'd never want a busybody in your life. But somehow, when busybodyism is enshrined by the government, then somehow it becomes tolerable and okay. It shouldn't be.
So we're coming up on the end of the segment here, but Eric, I had to ask you. I saw your article on they've come for your tires too, and I
Yeah.
thought that this is so worth your time. If, even if it's just for the quote from the guy from Josie Wales about there ain't no
Yeah.
end to doing good.
Yeah, the state of California has decided that people are no longer going to be free to pick the kinds of tires that they want for their vehicle because they might have higher rolling resistance. Vehicle manufacturers, when they put together a car, they have to deal with all sorts of regulatory compliance issues, and they have to deal with things like gas mileage requirements and emissions requirements. So they tend to fit tires that have the least possible rolling resistance to a car. So you buy the car, maybe you find that these tires suck in the winter, so I want a more aggressive all type of tire. That's going to give me some more grip in the wintertime. California wants to say, has said, they've decreed this. It's now a done deal that you're not allowed to do that because the slightly increased rolling resistance of the more aggressive tread means you're going to be burning more fuel and you're going to be emitting more gas, more greenhouse, even though it's fractional on a per car basis. It's just literally kind of analogous to, yeah, okay, if I take a cup of water and throw it in the ocean, I've increased the volume of the ocean. And if I take a cup of water out of the ocean, I've decreased the volume of the ocean. The ocean is still a massive body of water. And it's an immaterial difference. It's a meaningless difference. So they're doing this. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to just be California. It'll end up being Washington and Oregon and other blue states that emulate this. And then effectively, it'll be the whole country because the tire manufacturers are not going to continue to produce tires they can't sell in the majority of the country. So this is going to affect all of us, and it's going to result in tires being a lot more expensive, and it's going to result in people not being able to get the kinds of tires that they need for their particular type of conditions that they have to deal with every day.
I guess the bottom line here is um, you're not as free as the people in power allow you to be. You're as free as you choose to be, and sometimes that means you are not going to line up with the people in power. There are times where you're going to have to do what you need to or what is right to do without the permission of those in authority. And if we want to be free, you got to be willing to pay that price. It sounds like too many people would rather, oh, I don't want to be well thought or ill thought of. And, besides, I have nothing to hide because I'm not doing anything illegal until the definition changes. And then you
Yep.
are doing something illegal. So take ownership of your life, take ownership of
Yeah.
your freedom. Stop
And I would
asking
say
and waiting for permission.
And I would say take ownership of it righteously and get angry because of the rank hypocrisy of the people who are issuing these fatwas, these decrees from on high, who aren't affected by it. Trump driving around in his 250 fleet of Cadillac V8 powered Escalades. You can bet your bippy that Gavin Newsom and all these other people get whatever kinds of tires they want. This is
Yep.
all about, it's punitive. It's all designed to make our lives, you and me, regular people, to make our lives more difficult and more expensive. This is a sadistic thing and it's got to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is if you and I decide we're not having it anymore.
Here, here. Well, I feel vindicated. I feel energized, and I feel better informed than when we sat down. Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos, thanks again for joining me. Looking forward to our next conversation.
You too, Brian. Thank you.